Hello and welcome to this BIU podcast interview with safeguarding expert Nicola Bithell about the role of NFs in implementing safeguarding in sport. Nicola is head of safeguarding at Accrington Stanley Women FC, which competes in English football's Northwest Women's Regional League. But the majority of her experience has been gained from her police career, in which she has led departments that investigated high-profile and position of trust abuse. I'm Callum Murray, and I began by asking Nicola about her own sporting background and how it related to her interest in safeguarding.
Well, I don't have any sort of notable sporting background. I was brought up at the side of football and cricket pitches, always with a bat or ball in my hand to play with, because my father and my stepfather were both heavily involved in football and cricket at a local level. In fact, my dad actually got trials for Manchester United, but he couldn't go to them because he couldn't get there on the bus in time. So it shows how different things are now. It wasn't really a thing back in the day for girls to play alongside men's teams. And as such, I was more kept to playing with the boys at the side of the pitch, kicking a football around or making the tees at cricket, until I got to college and things developed. And I was then part of a women's football team, and I played college football and I played rugby for a local ladies team alongside several of my police colleagues, but only really for fun and fitness. I never hit the dizzy heights of the elite. My biggest passion was horse riding. I competed at quite a high level, but that's kind of all ancient history. On a more formal level, for the past 2 years, I've been head of safeguarding and welfare at Accrington Stanley Women's Football Club, which is a grassroots football club with Premier League ambitions. We've 23 teams across all age groups, and we're still growing. But that's it really around my sporting expertise and interest. I've got a love for sport, but have never attained those dizzy heights of hitting the elite levels.
And your career was in the police, and that, I think, was how you developed your interest and expertise in safeguarding. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I joined the police at 18. I had the privilege of a 32-year career, and I retired in 2020, having attained the rank of Detective Chief Inspector. But my predominant focus throughout the majority of my career was the investigation of serious and complex crime and public protection. I also led a team that responded to allegations of abuse, both current and past case, committed by perpetrators in positions of trust and who held high profile positions such as celebrities. And on leaving the police, I was commissioned by the Church of England to work on a national past case review of all previous reported safeguarding concerns and their response or lack of appropriate response, which was often the case. On conclusion of this, I was contracted by the director of the BIU, Greg McKenna, who saw some of the work that I'd done and asked me to work alongside them, developing the policies and protocols to direct and support safeguarding within biathlon. And that's where I sit now.
So, returning to sport, why is safeguarding in sport so important? And what's the role of a sports organisation such as a national federation?
In sport, there's a particular dynamic that's not reflected in many other areas, especially in elite sport. Elite sport in particular is often a culmination of a childhood dream, an ambition born out of a child's first time on skis or in a pool or kicking or hitting a ball. And when they watch their icons playing at that elite level and they have dreams to be as good as them and play in front of those big stadiums and the big crowds. And to achieve that goal, there's a structure in place that they have to negotiate. Hundreds, if not thousands of children, all with the very same dream and the very same ambition. And only a very small percentage get to achieve that ambition. And in order to become the best, they have to be the strongest and the fittest, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And they've to achieve those results because they have to be the best statistically as well. they have to have the support financially to pay for the kit, for transport, for coaching, and the capacity within the network of parents, friends, family to facilitate this. It's a dedication to the exclusion of all other activities, social events. They're monitored in relation to everything that they do, even down to weight, and often have to meet a certain criteria in relation to body image and present in a certain way. And as such, an athlete has to consistently be in control of everything they do. And all overseeing this is the power dynamic of the coaching team, who can make or break a child's career, who often spend more time with that individual on a one-to-one basis than their family. And in sport, we do things in front of people as an everyday occurrence that we would never do sort of in the supermarket or at school, such as simply just getting undressed without cognizance of your surroundings. And we see this every day in sport, especially in swimming and even in biathlon, where athletes come off the slopes and immediately start undressing in a public area in front of people who they know and who they don't know, men, women, young people. It's something that you would never just naturally do anywhere else. And further to this, really, in sport, an athlete's dependent on people to facilitate all of the above, and very often they become isolated in the bubble of their sport. And fear becomes an overriding factor, fear of not achieving those dreams and ambitions. And the longer they strive to achieve, the more invested and the harder it becomes to maintain those levels of requirement, to get fitter, to eat healthier, to be stronger, to train harder, to achieve more. And in striving to achieve these levels, the vulnerability increases around a number of things, really: financial hardship, eating disorders, anxiety, stress, fear of failure, injury, illness. And despite all this personal responsibility and commitment, the word of one person can simply make it all fall apart. And that's why sport leaves people so vulnerable. Their lives are in the hands of other people. Without the protection of safeguarding protocols, they have no voice to object, really.
So what's the role of the NF or the sports organisation in implementing that safeguarding to prevent those situations happening?
Well, it's the NF's job to put certain structures in place to prevent or happening. They should have a dedicated safeguarding structure within their own organisation. It's a duty to keep people safe. So for me, the national federations, ideally, and within their capability, because I know that they all do have different levels of capacity and financial capability to put things in place, but they should have a safeguarding structure within every national federation. It should be led by an individual who has appropriate understanding and experience, and supported throughout all the relevant training camps, courses and the like by suitably trained individuals who are visible and able to be approached, and that people have faith in, to speak openly in relation to concerns that they may have, so that they can report, record, and deal with them. We have a duty to protect our athletes and keep them healthy and safe and happy. And if we don't have those people on the ground looking out for that, and we don't have the facilities for people to report, or the understanding of how to report or who to speak to, due to the NFs not having appropriate policy and protocol marketed within the websites and the social media, then we don't hear about it. And if people don't know how to report or who to speak to and don't have that facility in place, then we're not going to have a full understanding of what kind of safeguarding concerns we have in the biathlon community. But further than that, the stakes are high in regards to athletes being abused, and that is just not excusable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if you have developed a sense of how prevalent abuse is in sport, and particularly in biathlon. I'm sure a lot of people would say we don't have safeguarding problems in biathlon, but what kinds of abuse can take place, and are certain kinds of sport more vulnerable than others?
I've done some research recently to try and find the global picture in relation to pulling together some facts and figures, and it's really hard to understand what's going on globally. But I think we only have to watch the media reporting to know that every sport seems to have had over recent years some concern raised about a safeguarding issue that was significant within their sport. I mean, when we talk about abuse in sport, we usually think of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and other serious incidents that meet the criminal threshold. And I think when we look at previous press reporting, it's quite obvious that throughout a variety of sports at all levels, safeguarding is a significant concern. But it only seems to be that higher level of abuse, for want of a easier way to describe it, that is reported. But it's much wider than this. Bigger concerns from grassroots up to elite are things like overtraining, training whilst injured, bullying, oppressive coaching, isolating team members, failing to respond to injuries and well-being issues, not having safe practices within the organisation, and a failure to manage risk when it comes to the simple things like safe places to conduct the activities that you conduct in, appropriate changing rooms and facilities. For example, a particular image in female sport, especially around the football, has been many of the girls at Accrington Stanley are young girls going through the changes that young girls' bodies go through. And the changing facilities are men's. And as such, we don't often have things like sanitary bins in the changing rooms. Now, that's a safeguarding issue because those girls are then feeling stress and anxiety as a result of having to go and play football, often against 11 boys, without being able to take care of themselves personally and prevent embarrassment or have the facilities that they need. So that's on a very lower sort of grassroots level. But when we look at sort of the wider European statistics, I did find a study called Child Abuse in Sport, European Statistics. It was called Cases. And they'd collected data from 10,302 adults across the UK, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Romania, and Spain. And it's the first such study of this scale that I was able to find in relation to sport in Europe. And they investigated a wide range of behaviours that are harmful to athletes, from verbal harassment and physical violence through to sexual abuse and neglect as a result of their sport. Now, when you look at the key findings that came out of that, 65% of adults aged 18 to 30 reported experiencing psychological violence as children as a result of their sport. 44% reported experiencing physical violence inside sport as children. And neglect was experienced by 37% of the respondents. 35% reported experiencing non-contact sexual violence. And when we talk about contact sexual abuse, 20% reported having been victims of contact sexual violence. Out of 10,302 adults spoken to, 2,600 of them were survivors of sexual abuse. Now, that is startling, absolutely startling. And the prevalence of interpersonal violence against children did come out as lowest for respondents in recreational sport and highest for those who competed in international sport. 84% of respondents in the survey who had competed in international sport reported being subject to interpersonal violence when they were children. And children belonging to ethnic minority groups were significantly more likely to experience abuse that came out at 76.9%. So it's not unique to one sport and it's not unique to one country, I think, is the answer to the question.
You mentioned earlier the power dynamic. How does that operate? How can it be abused? And how do you define a position of trust and a position of vulnerability in sport?
It varies from country to country, really. But I think if we look at the purest form of the legislation and translate it into countries where there is no specific legislation to manage this, a position of trust is someone who has a position that has a dynamic of increased power over a child or a vulnerable person within their care. So someone who has control of the decision making. And as I mentioned earlier, a coach is God when it comes to an athlete who is trying to either get on a team at grassroots level or achieve those elite sporting ambitions. And it isn't always evidenced when people don't get selected, why they don't get selected. And often it can be very vague. And it's been reported historically in gymnastics, the pressures that the gymnasts were under in relation to their management by the coaches. We only have to look at the story of abuse by Larry Nassar, the team doctor for the USA Olympic gymnast team, which was very widely publicised over through the Olympics. He could give the go-ahead for a child to be part of an Olympic team or not as a result of his report in relation to their health and well-being. And he took girls into a room and basically examined them inappropriately, and they took his word and followed his directions purely because of the position that he held as team doctor, because they trusted him and they trusted that he had the correct ethics and values to deal with them respectfully and not deal with them inappropriately and outside the bounds of what he should have been doing.
Do you have any practical tips for national federations to make sure their athletes are safe?
Have sound policies in place and follow protocols. Put a visible safeguarding structure in place within your organisation. Make sure that athletes have and your wider community have access to your structure and your policies. Give them a voice and let them know who they can talk to. Market the fact that you are taking safeguarding very seriously on your website, on your social media. Put a big button on the front of your website page saying report a concern, so that people only have to click on it and get easy access to the policies that you have in place and to reporting mechanisms, and have a whistleblowing policy in place so that people know that if they do report a concern, that you will protect them from any consequences to their career as a result of them reporting concerns to you.
What are the implications for NFs that fail to implement safeguarding measures?
In the longer term, we're hoping to put some legislation in place around the rules to ensure that the NFs have a safeguarding structure in place, and this will impact on their bids to potentially host major events. But in the interim, the stakes are higher than that, because it's not about financial loss. It's not about, the implications against the organisation or reputational implications. If the NFs fail to implement safeguarding measures, the highest stakes are the fact that their athletes will be vulnerable to abuse, and that is simply unacceptable.
Nikki, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Really interesting and really helpful, I think, for NFs.
Thank you.